Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see the summary of A Study of Poetry by Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold was born in Laleham in Middlesex on December 24th, 1822, and he began his career as a poet because he won recognition as a poet when he was a student itself, when he was studying in Rugby School, where his father, Thomas Arnold, was the headmaster at that time. Later, Arnold studied at Balliol College, that is Oxford University, and in 1844 he returned to Rugby itself as a teacher of classics. And he got married in 1851, and at the same time he began to work as a government school inspector. For 35 years he was in this position, and this helped him to travel throughout England and the continent. And in 1857, he was offered the post as a professor of poetry at Oxford University, and he worked there till 1867. And Arnold became the first professor to lecture in English, while all the lecturers till then were lecturing in Latin. He has written a vast volume of works, and his a few well-known works are Empedocles of Etna, poems, The Function of Criticism, Essays in Criticism, Dover Beach, Culture and Anarchy, and The Study of Poetry. And his approach, which established criticism as an art form, has influenced many major English critics, including T.S. Eliot, Lionel Trilling, and Harold Bloom. And Matthew Arnold died in Liverpool on April 15, 1888. And in this A Study of Poetry, Arnold criticizes the art of poetry as well as the art of criticism. That is, how they are writing poetry as well as how the critics are analyzing these poems. And Arnold firmly believes that art of poetry shows us a mirror of life, and therefore he considers poetry high above science, religion, and philosophy. And Arnold terms poetry as a criticism of life. And therefore, he actually goes against the accusation of Plato, who tells in his Republic that poets must be banned from his city, and says that as time goes, man will continue to find comfort and solace in poetry, and this is what actually Matthew Arnold firmly believed in. And he also says that when one reads poetry, he estimates it in three ways. One is the real estimate, that is valuing the poem based on what pleasure it gives to a person. Second is the historic estimate, that is based on the time when the poem was written or based on the writer who wrote it. And third is the personal estimate. Personal estimate means depends on the reader's personal likes and dislikes. And here we know very well that the real estimate is an unbiased viewpoint, because when he is reading the poem, what pleasure it's going to give to him, that is how the reader is going to estimate the poem. So this is an unbiased viewpoint, and what he says is generally this real estimate is surpassed by historic and personal estimate, because when a reader reads a poem and when he sees that a particular person has written the poem, he estimates the poem based on the writer, or personal estimate, where the reader's own likes and dislikes plays a major part in estimating the poem. And here he says that the historic estimate places on the historical contents and the value of art itself. So here you cannot say that the reader is valuing the poem based on what it is actually. And the personal estimate, on the other hand, it depends on the personal taste, that is the likes and dislikes of the reader, and this also will affect his judgment of poetry. And Arnold says that because these two are not correct, they are these two tendencies, that is the historic estimate and the personal estimate, tend to be fallacies. Fallacies means our own misjudgments, not true. That is what is the meaning of fallacy. And here he says the study of the historical background of the poetry often leads a critic skipping over the shortcomings and raises the poetry to a high pedestal, and therefore we will not notice the slight weaknesses which are present in the poem. That is, in case if a very great writer had written a poem, then the reader may start estimating the poem in a very high esteem only because a great writer has written it, and thereby he will not notice the weaknesses in the poem. And so he says in this historic estimate, it leads to the creation of classics and raises the poet to a nearly godlike standard, which is not correct. And Arnold says that if a poet is truly a classic, then his poetry will give the reader real pleasure, and it will enable him to compare and contrast other poetry which are not of the same high standard. So this, according to Arnold, is a real estimate of poetry. That is, he says that when you are reading a poem, it should give the reader a pleasure, and when it gives him pleasure and when high seriousness is there in this poem, then we can place it as classic. And so now Arnold speaks about the idea of imitation. He says that when a poet wants to reach high standards of the classics, what he will do is he will read all the classical writers and see how they had presented their work. And in that way, when he is continuously reading the works of a particular writer, he consciously unconsciously will anyway imitate them. And that is the idea of imitation according to Arnold. And he says that the historic estimate affects the study of ancient poets, while the personal estimate affects the study of modern or contemporary poets. Because when you're going to study an ancient poet's work, we will think that he is a great writer, and therefore we will think very high about the work also. And personal estimate is the reader's own likes and dislikes, and this actually affects the contemporary poets, because this personal estimate does not usually affect the ancient writers. And therefore Arnold proposes the touchstone method. Touchstone means that is a stone which we use to check whether the gold is real gold or artificial metal. So that is the stone name is touchstone. So he proposes a touchstone method for analyzing poetry also. And he says that this method will determine whether the poem is of high standard or not. Actually, he has borrowed this method from Longinus, who in his Sublime says that if a certain example of sublimity can please anyone regardless of habits, taste or age, and can please at all times, then it can be considered as a true example of the sublime. That is, if a work can please a person in all the ages, that is, it should have been a success when it was published, and later on when the generations came also, they should have enjoyed the work. And irrespective of the personal habits and taste of the reader, he should enjoy the work. Then that particular work can be accepted as sublime. This is what Longinus told in his on sublimity, and Arnold also says the same thing. And he says that this method was first suggested in England by Addison, and Addison said that he would have a man read classical works which have stood the test of time and place, and also those modern works which find high praise among contemporaries. And if that man fails to find any delight in them, then Arnold will come to a conclusion that it is not the author who lacks quality, but the reader who is incapable of discovering them. And Arnold also applies this touchstone method by taking examples from the time-tested classics, and he compares them with other poetry to determine whether they possess a high poetic standard of the classics. And he also says that poems need not resemble or possess any similarity to the touchstone. That is, it does not mean that if they are going to have certain works as touchstones, the work of another writer need not resemble the same work. It can be his own creation, but it must give the same pleasure, and that high seriousness must be in that work. This is what Arnold tries to say. And once again, he says that this touchstone should be in the mind of the reader, and this will help him to detect the high poetic quality that he is going to see in that work. And then he has to compare it to the great works which he has already kept in the touchstone level. And for this, we will ask who are the touchstones. So Arnold quotes Homer, Dante, Shakespeare and Milton as the touchstones to check the quality of the poetry in other person's works. And he says that the example he has quoted are dissimilar, because Homer, Dante, Shakespeare and Milton, they all write in a very different way. But when you see their work, we find that they possess high poetic quality. And he says that a critic need not work very hard in trying to explain the greatness of poetry when he has these touchstones. and he can merely point at some specimens of the high poetic quality and judge the work. Then he goes on to Aristotle's observation and he says that the best form of poetry possesses high truth and seriousness, and therefore he urges critics to apply this touchstone method to analyze and rate the poetry which they are reading. Then Arnold goes and speaks about the French poetry. Why he goes there is he says that French poetry had a great influence on the poetry of England. But at the same time, he says that the poetry of North France is different from the poetry of South France. And the poetry of South France actually influenced Italian literature, and it is the poetry of Northern France that dominated Europe in the 12th and 13th century. And how this poetry came to England is through the Anglo-Normans, and this poetry had a tremendous impact on English poetry. And if we notice, it will be seen that it was the Romance poems of France that was popular during that time. But Arnold says that it did not have any high special characteristics, and it also lacked the high truth, seriousness and diction of classic poetry, and it remains significant only from the historical point of view, that is depending on who wrote it and what age they wrote. Otherwise, he says they were not of a classical quality. And then he speaks about Chaucer. And he says Chaucer was influenced by French and Italian poetry, and Arnold speaks very high about Chaucer's poetry, because he says that Chaucer's poetry are the result of real estimate and not of the historic estimate. And he says that the superiority of Chaucer's verse lies both in his subject matter and his style, and Chaucer wrote about human life and nature as he saw it. And Arnold also speaks of Chaucer's diction and calls it as liquid diction, because he says that the fluidity in the manner of Chaucer's writing he considers as an irresistible virtue, because Chaucer's writing skill was greatly appreciated by Arnold. And Arnold, however, says that Chaucer is not classic, because when he compares Chaucer to Dante, he points out that Chaucer lacks a high seriousness of the classics. Therefore, he says that Chaucer cannot be considered as a classic, but his works are highly appreciated by Arnold. Next, Arnold mentions Milton and Shakespeare, and he credits them as classics, and he does not go into detail because definitely their works are accepted by everyone, and their works give pleasure to all the people of all the ages. And then he moves on to speak about Dryden and Pope. And according to Arnold, he feels that historic estimate only is done on Dryden and Pope, and he says that they are the great poets of the 18th century. But Dryden and Pope wrote better prose than poetry, and it should be also noticed that during the Restoration period, prose had a superior value than poetry. Like many of them were concentrating on prose, and therefore Dryden and Pope provided what the age needed. Therefore, Arnold says that they were classics of prose and not classics of poetry. And after Dryden and Pope, Arnold speaks of Gray. Though Gray had not written much, he wrote of high poetic value. Therefore, Arnold says that Gray belongs to the classic order. And now he goes to Robert Burns in the late 18th century and says that this is the period from which the personal estimate actually begins to affect the real estimate. And Burns, according to Arnold, is a better poet in Scottish than in England. And Arnold does not consider Burns to be a classic, and he says that this is because Burns lacks a high seriousness which is desired of poetry. And then he compares Burns to Chaucer, and he says that Burns' manner of presentation is deeper than that of Chaucer. And according to the real estimate, Burns lacks the high seriousness of the classics, but his poetry nevertheless has truthful substance and style. So he says Burns as a poet is really great, but he refuses to put him in the order of classic because he lacks the seriousness like Chaucer. And then he moves on to Byron, Shelley and Wordsworth, but he does not want to pass any judgment on their poetry, because Arnold believes that his estimate of these poets will be influenced by his own personal passion, because they are almost closer to his age than the classics, and also because their writings were of more personal nature, because we know Wordsworth wrote his personal feelings and even others. And finally, Arnold says that self-preservation of the classic is what has made classic to last till this age. And he says any amount of good literature will not be able to surpass the supremacy of the classics, as these classics has already stood the test of time and people will still continue to enjoy them for ages to come. And Arnold says that this is the result of the self-preserving nature of humanity also, because human nature also will remain the same throughout the ages, and those parts of the classics dealing with the subject will remain relevant to all times, and therefore the classics also will preserve themselves from being lost in time. And this is what Arnold tells in the study of poetry. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, please write it in the comment box. Like the video, share it with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe. Thank you.